They said no creature could survive the silence of Dustwell Prison, where the desert wind cuts like glass and mercy dies before dawn. But one summer morning, under a sky the color of rust and ash, the guards found something they couldn't explain. 3 German shepherds sitting motionless outside the prison gates, their paws blistered, their eyes fixed on the walls that held their master. Officer Ethan Cole, the man condemned for a crime he never committed. They said dogs forget when their master falls, but these 3 never did. And when the truth clawed its way through the dust, every man inside those walls learned that loyalty has a longer memory than justice.
Go straight ahead.
Stay with us, because what began as a farewell between a man and his dogs would unravel a secret buried deep in the heart of Dustwell County, where redemption walks on 4 legs and never leaves its post. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? And if this story stirs something in you, subscribe and join our circle of tales, where loyalty outlives every sentence. The town of Dustwell, Arizona, sat like a scar across the desert, its skyline a blur of sun-baked rooftops, leaning telephone poles, and air so dry it cracked your throat. Summer had burned everything hollow. Wind carried dust through the streets like old ghosts, whispering through shutters and rusted signs that read, "Liquor, Feed Store, Sheriff's Office." The horizon was a mirage of heat and regret. Dustwell had seen heroes rise, and just as easily fall. Once Ethan Cole had been that hero. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that came from a life of carrying both badge and burden. His face bore the weathered lines of the Arizona sun, a square jaw dusted with a permanent shadow of stubble, and eyes the color of burnt copper. Steady, observant, but now dimmed with disbelief. Ethan had served Dustwell as sheriff for nearly a decade, the kind of man who'd rather bleed than lie, who believed justice should be cleaner than the desert air. But even deserts have mirages, and sometimes the truth vanishes beneath them. It happened fast. One humid evening, under the glare of neon spilling from a saloon called Red Spur Tavern, the body of Thomas Wexler, a powerful land developer, was found slumped beside his Cadillac, shot once through the chest. Wexler had been rich, arrogant, and the kind of man who could make enemies by exhaling. But what made the story twist like a knife was the gun found nearby. A Colt .45 registered to Ethan Cole. Within hours, the headlines screamed betrayal. The sheriff turned killer. The town that once tipped its hat to him now spat on the ground at the sound of his name. The trial was swift, too neat and too quiet, like something choreographed behind closed doors. Witnesses disappeared. Documents appeared where none should have. The jury's verdict came down like a dry thunderclap. Guilty. The night of his arrest, Dustwell gathered outside the courthouse as if the heat itself demanded blood. Sheriff Ethan Cole, hands cuffed in front of him, was led down the steps. His badge had already been stripped from his chest, leaving a pale imprint of where it had once shone. The air stank of dust, sweat, and disbelief. From the edge of the crowd, 3 shapes broke through the noise. Ranger, Echo, and Sable, his loyal German shepherds. Ranger, the eldest at 7, stood tall and lean, his fur a mix of storm gray and black. He had the calm, steady eyes of a soldier who'd seen too much. Echo, 2 years younger, was restless and sharp, his ears always twitching, his movements quick as the wind. And Sable, the youngest, barely 2, carried the soft clumsiness of youth, her coat golden tan, her eyes bright with innocence unspoiled by the world's cruelty. They had worked beside Ethan for years, sniffing out danger, tracking fugitives, and once even saving a child lost in the Salt River Canyon. Now, as their master was dragged past, they barked until their throats went raw, their paws clawing the dust, refusing to move even as the guards pulled them back. Standing among the crowd was Deputy Mark Hanlon, Ethan's former right hand. Hanlon was in his 40s, compact, with a wiry build and a beard that could never quite decide between trimmed and wild. He'd once admired Ethan, followed him like a shadow, but ambition had turned to envy long ago. The way he crossed his arms that night, smirking faintly as Ethan passed, made it clear he'd already buried whatever loyalty he had left. There were whispers Hanlon had been close to Wexler, closer than he should have been. But in Dustwell, whispers vanished faster than rain. Watching from a second-story window was Sarah Wexler, the dead man's widow. She was 35, tall and pale, with auburn hair that caught the moonlight like copper wire. Grief had hollowed her face, but there was something else there too, a flicker of guilt, or maybe fear. She had known Ethan once, years before her marriage. In another life, perhaps they might have shared a future. Now their fates were bound by death and deceit. When Ethan was shoved into the armored transport, the door slammed with a sound that seemed to echo forever. As it drove away, he looked back once through the narrow slit of the window. He saw Ranger's ears perk, Echo's head tilt, and Sable's tail still wagging faintly as if refusing to understand. That night, in the sweltering silence of his cell, Ethan lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow as a dying clock. Sweat rolled down his temple, but his mind was colder than steel. He whispered into the dark, his voice rough but steady. Ranger, Echo, Sable, if there's a next life, I'll find you. Outside, a dust storm gathered on the horizon, sweeping through the valley like a wounded beast. Sand hissed against the prison walls, coating the world in red haze. Somewhere beyond the fences, 3 dogs sat beneath a dying mesquite tree, eyes turned toward the lights of the prison that now caged their master. The desert wind carried their low howls across the emptiness, 3 notes of sorrow, loyalty, and promise. But not everyone in Dustwell slept that night. In a dimly lit office at the courthouse, Deputy Hanlon met with a stranger in a white Stetson hat, passing him a brown envelope thick with cash. He won't talk, Hanlon muttered. The man nodded, his face half hidden in shadow. See that he doesn't. The fan hummed above Ethan's cot, slicing the air like a whispering blade. Somewhere deep inside the prison, the lights flickered once. Dustwell was holding its breath. And in that stillness, the story of the 3 German shepherds and the man they refused to forget had just begun. 3 years later, Dustwell had stopped speaking Ethan Cole's name aloud, as though the desert itself had swallowed the syllables. The sun still beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt streets, and the air still shimmered with heat so thick it turned distance into illusion. Time had dried the scandal like blood under sand, but ghosts have long memories. Every full moon, when the night sky bled silver, the prison guards swore they saw them. 3 German shepherds standing motionless outside the southern fence, their silhouettes stretched long across the dust. Some guards joked they were spirits. Others stopped joking altogether. The locals had given them a name, the 3 Shadows of Dustwell. Ranger, the oldest, bore new scars along his muzzle and a limp from an old fight with a coyote. Echo's left ear was torn halfway, but his eyes gleamed with restless purpose. Sable, no longer the clumsy pup, had grown into a fierce and graceful hunter. her fur darker, her gaze sharper, as if the years had carved the innocence out of her. They hunted together in silence, sleeping beneath an abandoned railcar at the edge of town, never straying far from the walls that held their master. Inside those same walls, Ethan Cole had become more ghost than man. The years had hollowed him out, his once strong frame reduced to lean sinew and patience. His beard grew coarse, streaked with gray, and his voice, when he used it, was low and calm, like someone who had already made peace with the gallows. He had not written letters, not pleaded, not confessed. When asked for last words or meals, he always gave the same answer: not yet. Some guards pitied him, others feared him. One of those guards was Miles Turner, a new recruit barely 25. Miles was tall but thin, with the awkward gait of a man who hadn't yet grown into his uniform. His sandy hair fell across his forehead, and his pale blue eyes carried a kind of nervous kindness rare inside prison walls. Unlike the older guards, Miles didn't believe in the stories about Ethan's guilt. His father had been a police officer, gunned down in a robbery when Miles was a boy, so perhaps he felt something in common with the fallen sheriff. Every time Miles passed Ethan's cell on the night shift, he would pause for just a moment. Not to speak, not to judge, just to listen to the silence, which somehow felt alive. One night, under the thin hum of fluorescent light, Miles heard a sound echoing through the corridor, faint, rhythmic, distant. At first he thought it was the wind, but then came the unmistakable sound of barking, 3 barks, spaced like a heartbeat. He froze. It was past midnight. No one else was in the yard. He turned toward Ethan's cell just as the man lifted his head. Their eyes met through the bars. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his lips curved slightly. "They're still here," he said softly. "Aren't they?" Miles swallowed, unsure how to answer. "Sir, I don't know what you mean." Ethan leaned forward, voice barely a whisper. "You'll hear them again when the moon turns full." By morning, Miles couldn't shake the unease. During breakfast in the guardroom, he mentioned the barking. The older guards laughed it off, especially Harvey Briggs, the head of night security. Harvey was a thick man in his 50s, bald except for a gray fringe around his ears, with a permanent smirk and a scar running down his cheek from a prison riot years ago. He prided himself on being unshakable. "Ghost dogs, rookie," he barked. "That's just the wind sneaking through the fences. Don't let the desert whisper nonsense into your ears." But Harvey didn't laugh that night. None of them did. Because when the next full moon rose, the barking returned, louder, closer, echoing down the metal halls. The prisoners stirred restlessly, whispering of omens and debts unpaid. Guards flooded the yard, flashlights sweeping the perimeter. And there, beyond the chain link and barbed wire, stood the 3 shadows, eyes gleaming gold under the moonlight, bodies perfectly still. Harvey cursed, drew his revolver, and fired once into the air. The dogs didn't flinch. They simply turned their heads toward the sound of his voice, then back toward the cell blocks, as if listening for someone. When the guards advanced, the trio vanished into the desert mist, leaving only paw prints in the dust. 3 sets, side by side, leading nowhere. By dawn, word of the sighting had reached Warden Harlan Pike. Pike was a man carved from rules and stone. In his late 50s, tall and severe, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, he had built his reputation on discipline. Yet there was a part of him, buried deep beneath the uniform, that believed in signs. The barking had come the same night he'd reopened Ethan Cole's case file, And since then, strange things had followed. Papers missing, witnesses untraceable, and one investigator who'd left Dustwell in silence. That morning, Pike stood in his office staring at the faded photograph of Ethan from years ago. Badge gleaming, smile proud. He turned it face down. "Find out where those dogs came from," he ordered Harvey. "Every kennel, every farm, every stray report within 50 miles. I want them gone." But when Harvey sent men out with trucks and rifles, every lead came back empty. The desert swallowed their tracks as quickly as it revealed them. That evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Pike locked his office and started down the corridor. The air was still, the cells quiet. Then, from the far end of the hall, came a sound that made him stop cold. 3 soft barks, slow, deliberate, echoing off the walls. Pike's hand trembled against his keys. "Who's there?" he snapped, but no answer came. Only the sound of chains rattling in a cell he thought was empty. When he reached the end of the corridor, he found Ethan awake, sitting on his cot, eyes fixed forward. "They're close tonight," Ethan murmured. The warden's jaw tightened. "You're a condemned man, Cole. Don't start talking about ghosts." Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Ghosts don't guard fences, Warden. They wait for the right time to break them." Outside, the desert wind rose, carrying 3 distant howls that wound through the prison like a prayer unanswered. The morning the order came down was one of those Dustwell mornings where the air seemed to shimmer with heat before the sun had even cleared the ridge. The guards moved slower than usual, their uniforms clinging to sweat, the metallic scent of dust hanging thick in every breath. In the yard, the convicts paused at the sound of engines approaching. A van bearing the insignia of the Maricopa County Animal Division rumbled through the gates. Inside were 3 German shepherds who had waited too long for this moment. Ranger was first to step out, guided by a handler holding a heavy leather leash. His fur had gone coarse and gray along the muzzle, his left eye clouded with age, but he stood tall, tail low, posture dignified like a soldier still on duty. Beside him was Echo, broader and heavier, his movements cautious but his gaze sharp as flint. And trailing close was Sable, the youngest yet no longer the naive pup, her coat darker now, her ribs faintly visible from years surviving the desert's hunger. The 3 sniffed the dry air, muscles tensing as the scent of the prison drifted toward them. Their handler, Dr. William Gant, was not a guard, but a veterinarian contracted by the state. A middle-aged man with silver-rimmed glasses, a gentle stoop from long years bending over animals. His hair was thinning, his expression weary but kind. He had served in Afghanistan once, tending K-9 units for the military, and it showed in the way he spoke to the dogs, with respect, not command. "Easy now, Rangers," he murmured. "You're going home. Just not the kind of home you remember." Inside the prison, Warden Harlan Pike waited in the observation room, his face carved in its usual stoic mask. But this time, there was a flicker of unease beneath the surface. He had approved the reunion reluctantly, telling himself it was for order's sake, for closure, not compassion. Yet something in Ethan Cole's eyes when he'd asked, calm, resigned, but burning with a strange certainty, had unsettled him. Perhaps Pike had granted the request not because of regulation, but because he wanted to believe in something human within these walls. Ethan was led in by 2 guards. Shackles bound his wrists and ankles, the chains rattling softly against the concrete. His beard had grown thicker, streaked with gray, and though his frame was thinner, there was still a quiet strength in the way he carried himself. His eyes, those same copper eyes, were alive for the first time in years. Across the small room, separated by a low barricade, the three dogs stood waiting. The air felt charged, the silence before a storm. Then Sable whined, a soft sound that trembled through the walls. Ranger gave a short bark. Echo took a single step forward, nose twitching. Ethan froze. His throat worked, but no words came. And then, as if a string had snapped, the handler let go. The three German shepherds surged forward, chains clattering, claws scraping on the concrete. The guards shouted, but no one moved to stop them. Ranger reached Ethan first, pressing his head into the man's chest, whining deep and low. Echo circled behind, pawing at Ethan's knees, while Sable leapt up, licking his hands until her fur was wet with tears and dust. Ethan dropped to his knees, his chains clanging against the floor, his voice cracked like breaking stone. "You still remember me, after all this time?" The room fell utterly silent except for the panting of dogs and the ragged sound of Ethan's breath. Even the guards, men hardened by years of violence, looked away. Dr. Gant's hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. "They remember," he murmured. "They always do." Then something shifted. Ranger's body stiffened. He backed away half a step, head tilted, nose flaring, a low growl built in his throat. Echo followed, pressing closer to Ethan, sniffing his chest as though searching for something beneath the skin. Sable let out a sharp bark, circling. Ethan frowned, confused. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, reaching to calm them, but Ranger only growled louder, pawing once, twice against his chest, right over his heart. "Doctor," the warden said sharply, "control them." But Dr. Gant didn't move. His eyes had gone wide behind his glasses. "Wait! They're not attacking." He stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Sir, has your chest hurt lately?" Ethan hesitated, sweat shining on his brow. "Sometimes. It passes." Gant knelt, pressed his stethoscope against Ethan's ribs. The silence stretched. Then he exhaled sharply. "Warden, this man needs medical attention immediately." Pike's brows furrowed. "Explain." "It's his heart," Gant said, rising. "Severe arrhythmia, likely congenital, worsened by stress and heat. If untreated, he won't make it another month." The words hit the room like a blow. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan sat still, his dogs huddled around him, as if they'd known all along. Ranger rested his muzzle on Ethan's knee. Echo leaned against his shoulder, and Sable whined softly, the sound more human than animal. Ethan's eyes filled again, not with sorrow this time, but with quiet awe. "You knew," he whispered to them. "You came to warn me." Warden Pike said nothing for a long time. The faint hum of the air conditioner was the only sound between them. Then, slowly, he nodded to the guards. "Take him to the infirmary. Now." As they led Ethan away, the dogs followed to the edge of the room, straining against their handlers' grips, their eyes never leaving their master. The heavy doors shut behind him with a hollow thud, but the barking continued. 3 voices calling out in unison, echoing down the hallway like a promise that would not die. That night, Warden Pike sat alone in his office, staring at the old case file once more. The pages seemed heavier now, as though weighed down by guilt itself. He rubbed his temple, then closed the folder for good. "Maybe justice doesn't die," he muttered under his breath. "Maybe it just takes the form of 3 dogs waiting outside a man's cell." Outside, beyond the walls, the desert wind rose again, carrying the faintest sound of howling toward the stars. The story broke like a dust storm. One morning, the Dustwell Gazette carried a single column no longer than a cigarette burn, buried under the classifieds. It mentioned 3 German shepherds who had saved their master's life on death row, a man once branded a murderer. By noon, that tiny column had spread through town like wildfire. Shopkeepers paused mid-sale, old ranchers leaned closer over their coffee, and whispers began to bloom where silence had reigned for years. For the first time since the trial, people were saying Ethan Cole's name without spitting afterward. Among those who read the story was Clara Hayes, a journalist barely 26, with a fire in her eyes that the desert had yet to smother. She had moved to Dustwell 2 years earlier from Tucson, chasing stories about frontier towns and the strange ghosts that lived inside them. Clara was tall and lean, her hair the color of bronze dust under sunlight, usually tied in a messy braid. Her freckles danced across her pale cheeks, and her clothes, a loose shirt tucked into faded jeans, told the story of someone too impatient for fashion, too hungry for truth. She had the stubborn look of a woman who had learned young that men stopped listening once you asked the wrong question. The article on Ethan Cole's dogs caught her attention instantly. She'd heard the old rumors about the sheriff who fell from grace, but the details never sat right. When she saw the warden's name, Harlan Pike, something clicked. Her father, a retired court clerk, had once told her over whiskey that Pike had a talent for making files disappear. She began digging. Clara spent the next week haunting the county archives, a one-room furnace of old paper and mildew. The clerk, Nolan Briggs, was an elderly man with bent shoulders and liver-spotted hands who had been there since Dustwell's founding days. His face was a map of wrinkles, his glasses thick as the bottoms of glass jars. "Wexler case?" he rasped when she asked. "Best leave that buried, miss. Buried things here tend to stay buried." But Clara smiled politely and slid a pack of Camels across the desk. "Then I suppose you won't mind if I do the digging myself." 2 nights later, her persistence paid off. She found a folder mislabeled under Financial Disputes, 1974. Inside were carbon copies of statements and witness forms, one signed not by a judge but by Deputy Mark Hanlon, the same man who had testified against Ethan. But one line stood out. Witness verified under supervision of Captain H. Pike. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Pike hadn't been warden back then. He had been a police captain, temporarily attached to the Wexler investigation. That meant he had controlled the evidence before trial. She followed the trail until it led to a box locked in the back storage of the courthouse. Inside, she found photographs, one of a bullet wound on Wexler's body, another of a revolver labeled Exhibit A. The gun was a Colt .45, same as Ethan's, but the serial number had been scratched out and rewritten, sloppily, by someone in a hurry. Her stomach dropped. The next morning, she drove her dusty blue pickup to Dustwell Prison. The guards at the main gate dismissed her credentials, but she had come prepared. In the evening, when the sun sank behind the warden's office, she parked her truck by the coal shed and waited until the night shift changed. The desert was a chorus of cicadas and wind. She moved fast, pressing herself along the concrete wall, her boots whispering against gravel. The security lights hummed and flickered. When she reached the west cell block, she spotted Ethan through a barred window, sitting, as always, on his cot, motionless but awake. His eyes lifted when he heard the faint scrape of metal. "Who's there?" he whispered. Clara crouched by the vent and slid a folded scrap of paper through the narrow gap between the bars. "My name's Clara Hayes," she said softly. I'm with the Gazette. I've seen your file. You didn't kill him, Ethan, but they'll never let you out. Ethan's fingers trembled as he unfolded the note. It was short. The evidence was planted. Pike was in charge of the gun. He looked up, but she was already gone, her boots fading into the hum of the desert wind. That same night, 3 figures moved in the darkness outside the southern wall. Ranger led the charge, sniffing the air with a sense of purpose that seemed almost human. Echo followed close, his ears twitching toward every creak of chain and echo of boot. Sable trailed behind, smaller but quicker, her paws kicking up the red dust that shimmered under the moonlight. They dug tirelessly under the fence, the scent of their master guiding them like a compass through the night. By dawn, a guard named Reed Toller, a stocky man with a beer gut and a face perpetually sunburned, found the tunnel, small, deep, and freshly dug, right behind the old coal shed. He sounded the alarm. The guards swept the area, guns drawn, but the dogs were gone. Only the paw prints remained, circling the hole like signatures. Meanwhile, Clara never made it home. Her truck was found abandoned near Route 8, driver's side door ajar, her notebook missing. The sheriff's office claimed she had left town, that reporters were known to chase ghosts and never return. But in the desert outside Dustwell, beneath the wind's long howl, the locals swore they could still hear a fourth echo joining the 3. A woman's voice carried in the night, calling the name of the man she tried to save. Inside his cell, Ethan sat motionless, the note crumpled in his hand. The wind through the vent carried a faint scent of smoke and rain. Somewhere far away, a low howl rose, followed by 2 more. His dogs were coming, and perhaps this time, they weren't coming alone. The night before Ethan Cole's transfer was colder than it had any right to be. The wind from the east carried the taste of iron and dust, scraping across the windows of Dustwell Prison like fingernails. Every corridor hummed with tension. Guards spoke in hushed tones, and even the clocks seemed to tick slower, as if the building itself was holding its breath. In his cell, Ethan sat on the edge of the cot, the faint glow of a single lamp outlining the hollows in his face. He was no longer the sheriff who'd once patrolled the ridges with his badge gleaming under sunlight. He was a man stripped bare, and yet tonight, there was something unbroken in him. Warden Harlan Pike stood in his office with the blinds half drawn, staring at the desert beyond. His reflection in the glass looked older, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The guilt that had begun as a whisper now clawed at him every time he looked at Ethan's file. On his desk lay the photo Clara Hayes had taken before her disappearance. Ethan and his 3 dogs, taken years ago, before the trial. Pike's hand trembled as he reached for his glass of bourbon. He had done terrible things in Dustwell, things he'd told himself were for order, for control. But when Clara's body was found 2 days ago, half buried under red sand near the rail tracks, the illusion of control had crumbled. At dawn, Pike ordered one final meeting between Ethan and the dogs, under the guise of a farewell. But deep down, he needed to see the man one more time, not as warden and prisoner, but as judge and confessor. The handlers led Ranger, Echo, and Sable into the visitation room. The dogs had changed again. Their fur was matted with soot and sand, their ribs visible, yet their posture unbowed. Ranger walked first, eyes sharp, limping slightly from an old wound. Echo followed, muscles tense, tail low but steady. Sable brought up the rear, smaller, quicker, her amber eyes flicking from guard to guard as though memorizing every threat. Ethan was waiting, his hands shackled in front of him. When the dogs entered, he smiled, a weary, fragile smile that carried both love and resignation. "There you are," he whispered, kneeling as far as his chains would allow. The dogs pressed close, silent but trembling. Ranger leaned his head against Ethan's shoulder. Echo licked his hand, and Sable rested her head on his knee. Ethan's voice broke. "If I don't make it out, you know what to do." Pike entered quietly, closing the door behind him. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was pale. "You shouldn't have asked to see them," he said, his tone unsteady. "It only makes this harder." Ethan looked up, eyes steady. "Harder for who, Warden? Me or you?" The room went still. Pike's fingers clenched around the file in his hand. "You know things you shouldn't," he muttered, stepping closer. "Things that could tear this place apart." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Then, maybe it deserves to fall." Before Pike could reply, Echo gave a low, warning growl. The oil lamp on the desk flickered as the warden's hand brushed against it. His breath came quick and shallow. "You don't understand," he said, voice rising. "If this truth comes out, none of us walk away clean." That was when Ranger barked, loud and sharp, as if cutting through the tension. Pike flinched. His hand hit the lamp, sending it crashing to the floor. Flames licked the edge of a curtain, then leapt upward, hungry and fast. Panic exploded in the small room. Guards outside shouted as smoke poured under the door. Sable darted forward, biting through Ethan's wrist shackle with surprising force. The chain snapped. Echo tugged at his arm, pulling him toward the far wall. Ranger circled between Ethan and Pike, barking wildly as the flames grew. Pike stumbled back, coughing, eyes wide. "You think you can run, Cole? You think they'll let you?" Ethan grabbed Ranger's collar, pulling him close. "Ranger!" he shouted over the roar of fire. "Take them out!" The dogs hesitated for only a moment before obeying. Ranger lunged toward the back of the room, pawing at a vent half hidden behind the desk. Echo and Sable joined, claws scraping against metal until the panel tore free. Smoke filled the air. Ethan turned toward Pike, his voice hoarse. "You could have ended this years ago." Pike shook his head, his face streaked with ash. "You don't know what I've lost." Before either man could speak again, the ceiling groaned. A beam fell between them, sending sparks cascading across the floor. Ethan dove for the vent. The last thing he saw was Pike's silhouette through the fire, standing motionless as the flames swallowed him whole. Outside, alarms wailed. Guards scrambled with hoses, shouting orders lost in the chaos. By the time they reached the visitation room, the door had collapsed inward. Smoke choked the hallway, thick as tar. When the fire was finally doused, all that remained were ashes, twisted metal, and on the floor, 3 distinct paw prints in the soot, leading toward the western wall. Beyond the fence, the sand bore faint impressions of their escape, vanishing into the desert wind. At sunrise, the warden's office was silent, the only sound the distant howl of dogs. Some said it was the wind. Others swore it was Ethan calling them home. But those who were there that night never forgot the sound. 3 barks echoing against the dawn, each one louder than the last, carrying across the red desert until it became a vow. They say not all miracles come with wings. Some walk on 4 legs and carry the kind of faith only heaven could teach. In the burning heart of Dustwell, where man's justice failed, something divine moved quietly through smoke and sand. 3 loyal shepherds who never forgot, a man who never lost hope, and a mercy that rose like dawn after the longest night. Maybe that's how God works. Not in thunder or fire, but in the small, stubborn acts of love that refuse to die. So tonight, if you've ever lost something or someone, hold that faith close. The same hand that guided those 3 dogs through the desert still guides us. Through our guilt, through our storms, through the places where light feels too far to reach. If this story touched you, share it. Let the world remember that loyalty is holy, that love is proof we're never truly alone. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you believe miracles look like in your own life. And before you go, subscribe. Join our family of stories where faith still breathes between dusk and dawn. May God bless you. May He watch over your loved ones. And may the shepherd above guard every heart that still dares to hope.